Well, Britain's in quite a difficult place in terms of exports. We've got a record trade deficit as of last year, and we've actually got larger trade deficit than countries like Italy and Cyprus, which is quite a major problem. If you look at services, we actually have a trade surplus, so we're doing quite well on services, but we have a real problem on goods. And this has happened in the 90s, where we've seen consumption-driven economic growth, and we didn't really improve on our exports. In fact, quite the inverse. We were losing out massively in the 90s, and we've seen a complete movement away from back in the 1960s, where perhaps we had export markets that were strong in terms of India or Canada, and now actually we're facing a situation where actually 9 out of the 10 biggest markets for us are European markets and the US. So traditional, pretty well established, pretty slow growth economies are the ones that we're most engaged with in export terms, as opposed to the vibrant growing ones in the new world. IOD members are exceptional in terms of their exporting activity. Nationally, the average for exporting activity is about 32% of businesses. In the IOD's case, actually, it's 57% of IOD members are exporting, so almost double the national average. It's a really exceptional figure, and actually far higher than in any other national business representative body in this country. So it's a good story there. The interesting thing as well is that IOD members are exporting to every part of the world. There isn't a country or corner of the world that isn't exported to by IOD members. There's a breadth in terms of services, goods, and all sorts of activities going on, from things like sheepskin jackets to Russia, ice skates to Argentina, and a whole range of other weird and wacky products and services being delivered. So it's great news, and we need to keep that up. Well, I suppose some of the things we picked up in the research are these things. The first thing is that an awful lot of members still, those that are exporting, account for a relatively modest amount of their turnover through exporting. I think about half, under 30% of their turnover is driven by export activity, with the other half having somewhere between 30 and 100% of their overall turnover being accounted for by export activity. About a third of members actually have a majority export-driven turnover, which I think is good news, but it needs to be boosted. The other major factor, I think, is about aspirations and experiences of growth in export activity over the last year and looking ahead to the next. So of those that were exporting, about half last year saw a growth in the amount that export accounted for in their turnover. And looking ahead into the next 12 months, there's an even larger number, I think about 59%, who say that actually they're expecting exports to account for a larger chunk of their overall turnover. From the research that we conducted, what was clear was that people who got into exporting, and hence a good reason for people to think about ways of getting into exporting, a big reason was what I call a strategic factor. A lot of businesses took a long, hard look at how they could expand their business as part of a business plan or as part of a need to realise sort of market potential in overseas markets, and took a really strategic look at where they need to go. So I think in many cases, those thinking about export, those watching this video now and thinking what to do next, need to just think about what other markets, what are the markets, where should they go, why should they be there? So research is critical, and so I would suggest to them they need to look at the IOD's work that we're doing on this, the assets that are on this website, explaining to them things like political risk, the challenges of doing business in certain markets, the language and regulatory barriers, and indeed some things like that might not instantly come to mind, like analysis of payment regimes, because quite clearly a lot of businesses are very cash flow driven business models. So I'd say do your research, do it well, and think strategically. But what I would say is the research also shows that a number of our member businesses got into exporting for purely kind of tactical reasons. They had a direct approach from overseas, an unsolicited inquiry, or maybe a parent company sort of encouraged them to go out to those places. So I don't underestimate the importance of kind of unknown approaches. And the IOD is also working very hard on this with UKTI right now to see if there are ways that we can try and make sure those opportunities, those unsolicited inquiries from overseas, can get through to members. So I'm quite keen actually to say right now to members watching this, if there's anything you think we could be doing, if there are things you'd like to let us know about how we could encourage UKTI to work with us to help you to get out there and export, then we'd be welcome to hear that back from you. So thinking also about how exporters actually expand and do more in the export space, I think what our research shows is that a number of exporters are still accounting for relatively modest amounts of turnover in terms of their export activity. About 50% have less than 30% of turnover accounted for by their exports. So there's plenty of potential for growth. So I think businesses do well to think about how they could do more. I think part of that is about having the same type of approach as businesses that aren't exporting. Do your research, think about your markets, think about how you expand into different territories overseas. And what I would say here is quite an interesting reflection is when we looked at IOD member data and about the markets that had seen the most stellar growth in the last 2 years, there were some unpredictable places. You know, the Ghanas, the Kenyas, the predictable, I suppose, Russias of this world came up in a top 10. But there were also other markets like Slovakia, which actually, you know, may well present lower regulatory, lower challenges to a lot of businesses that they ought to consider. So what I'd say is take a very worldwide view in terms of exporting and work back from that rather than necessarily just particularly going down into one market or another. Do your research, do it well, and consider expanding.